everybody! So welcome to July's live class, which is a bit of an extension of June's live class. And if you missed any of my past live classes, including June's, you can always go back, and I have a whole list of them in the description box of this video of every live class I have done that goes through and just does, I've done acrylic basics, gel basics, acrylic paint versus gel paint, sketching characters, and I feel like there's another one that I cannot remember at the moment, but there's been a lot of them so far, and there's going to be many more in the future. So if you did miss any of those, there will be links in the description box below. Like I said, though, this class is an extension of last month's that was sketching characters and character breakdowns. And when you do a character breakdown, you look at all of the different shapes and you kind of figure out how to break it apart to sketch it is what we really focused on in that class. And this class is going to be more how to break down a 3D element to sculpt it, as well as general 3D sculpting and painting tips. So if you're going to be painting an item that's 3D, that's where the painting element comes into it. It's not general painting tips, but painting something that's three-dimensional, because there's just a few different little tricks so that you don't get paint where it doesn't belong, because it's very easy because the 3D elements can get in the way of painting them. So we'll go through all of that fun stuff, as well as just generalized ideas about sculpting with 3D. And we're going to be doing this in acrylic. A lot of these tips, though, would apply for gel as far as the concepts that are there. So if you are somebody that doesn't work with acrylic, but you work with 4D gel or some kind of a 3D gel type product, I would still recommend sticking along with this class. You may not, find use with everything, but there will be stuff. And any questions along the way that anybody has, whether they're pertaining to acrylic or gel or whatever you have, if it's, if you just have a question that pops into your mind, don't hesitate to ask. I will be keeping my eye on the comment section, and I will be answering them when they come up and when it fits into the class very well. So the first thing we're going to do, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is we're going to gather our supplies. You're going to need monomer, and I'll touch more on what kinds of monomers are ideal in a second. You're going to need some black and tan acrylic powder, a 3D sculpting brush, paper towels, black and white paint, and then I also want to add, I did grab 2 more colors of paint. I have a light pink and a burgundy, so if you want to grab those will be good for Mickey's mouth. And I forgot to put those on my original class list, so if you are looking at your list of supplies and thinking, oh man, I didn't say that, I apologize. But do grab some other mouth colors as well. And then you also are going to need a small detail brush for painting with your acrylic paint, a water cup, matte top coat, your nail to work on top of, and then your Mickey Mouse reference photo. And for anybody that's wondering where you get this list ahead of time, I do send them out in an email a week ahead. So if you send me an email to hotpinkzebrapolish@hotmail.com, I will add you to that email list so that you can be all caught up to date for next month's class. Otherwise, whenever I make these little live videos available I kind of give a little breakdown on the live video. You can click on it before it starts, and I do them usually a few days ahead of time, and you can see a little idea of what the class is about, and it'll give you an idea of what you should have prepared if you do want to, and you don't want to be part of my whole list. But really, though, it's not that big a deal. It's just a couple emails a month. And so that's your supply list. Now, the basic tips for 3D sculpting, and I'm sure I will have a bunch more as we're working, because it's really hard for me to think of all of these things when I'm not sculpting something and I'm just making up these little slides and thinking, good tips for 3D sculpting, and I miss stuff, because there's, I'm sure, things that'll come up as we go. But the first one, and I would say maybe the most important one, is don't use odorless monomer. So a quick little chemistry breakdown for you guys is that when monomer is curing with polymer, the powder, when your liquid is curing with the powder, it doesn't evaporate, it off-gasses. So as it's curing, it's off-gassing, and these little scent molecules are going up into the air. And that happens no matter what. Odorless monomer is slow-setting acrylic monomer. So if you have a monomer that is odorless, it's not actually off-gassing less, it's just setting slower so that the smell is less overbearing. And so when you have that, and you're trying to sculpt something with 3D, and it's taking forever for the acrylic to cure because you're using this slow-setting monomer, it's going to make it so that what you're working on just doesn't work. And a lot of times, those odorless monomers have an oily type of a texture to them. They have this like extra film that even after you finish sculpting, it's still there, and it just makes 3D work almost impossible. So, you know, circumstance, if you can have it, don't use odorless monomer. In fact, use a fast setting monomer. So I'm really just gonna grab my big bottles of monomer. Okay, so we have, these are the two that I use for everything. I love these monomers. I buy them in reasonably large bottles because I use them constantly. We have this one from Koopa. It is their Structure. It's the Koopa Divinity Structure Traditional Monomer. This one I actually love. I use this for any sculpting that isn't 3D work, but like the base of nails, my overlays, I use this one for. It is I would say like a average speed setting monomer. It's not slow, it's not fast. It's just your normal. And this is the other monomer that I use. This is the Koopa. This is their Artfinity Dimension 3D Nail Art Monomer. So this is the one I use for all my 3D art in the past couple months. I just started using this and I instantly fell in love with it, which if you want to hear me gushing on it, go to my Extreme 3D Giraffe video and you'll get an earful about this particular monomer. But use a monomer that's one of these two. This one will work. The traditional monomer is fine, or any traditional normal speed setting monomer is fine. But if you can get your hands on something that is a speed set or a 3D art monomer or something along those lines, that's going to be better, just because it'll make your 3D art get height easier, because the acrylic, as it's setting, if this is your acrylic bead that you set down, as it's setting and it's not cured, it's going to slowly kind of spread out. But if it cures faster, it's not going to spread out as much because it's already starting to cure as soon as you set it down. And so you set it down, you mold it into shape, and you don't have to worry about it falling out of that shape because it's there. It's there right away. So if you can get, like I said, if you can get your hands on a 3D monomer, whether it's this one or just a speed set monomer. I know OPI has, or at least they used to. All kinds of brands are switching around what kind of products they have. But they used to have a speed set or a competition. If it says competition monomer, those are speed set as well, because competitions are all about time. So if you can get something that's like those products, that's what you're going to want to use. The next thing is to use a finely milled acrylic powder, and with even pigment distribution. So that's something that you almost can't tell until you buy a product. So when you're shopping around for your acrylic powder, use recommendations, listen to what people have to say, and then try some out. Buy single colors. If you can buy a single color from 6 different brands, 8 different brands, whatever you want to test out. I know shipping costs are horrendous when you're buying just one, because they don't give you free shipping options usually. But if you have the means to try out a bunch of different brands, I would highly recommend that, because you'll find what you like and you'll find what you don't like. And if you're finding that 3D art is just insanely difficult for you, but conceptually you think you got it and it's like your products are just working against you, you probably have products that are working against you, and you should try different ones. They're not all created equally. I learned with C&D's acrylic line, their monomer and their polymer, I hate them. Not to be horrible and like super harsh, but I've gone back and I've tried again, and that stuff just does not work for me. Doesn't work for me. Other people like C&D's acrylic line. Just doesn't work for me. Like I said, find what works for you, listen to recommendations, but some people just like certain things, and find a brand for your colored powders that you like. Now the next one is to use a 3D brush that is 100% Kolinsky. I have seen 3D art brushes that are vegan, and I am so pro vegan and trying to be as cruelty-free as possible, but legitimately I have not used a vegan brush for acrylic that holds up. And so I do use a Kolinsky brush, and mine is, you guys are going to be like, I'm a Koopa ad here. This one, it's not a Koopa ad. There's no sponsorship to this video whatsoever. But this is Koopa's Artfinity 3D brush. I have gone through 3 of these brushes now. They're my favorite little sculpting brush. The other thing I love about them is that on the back they have a retractable dotting tool. So anytime you see me sculpting with a dotting tool, it's this one, because it's just stuck to my brush and it's got this little retractable thing. So I really do like this brush, and this is the one I use all the time. And then after that, allow your product some time to rest before sculpting. So that mainly comes in depending on how fast your monomer sets will depend on how much time you need to allow your product to rest. With my 3D sculpting monomer that I use from Koopa, I allow it to rest 10 to 30 seconds, depending on what I'm doing. With normal monomer, I maybe allow it to rest 30 seconds to a minute. Again, depending on what I'm doing. If you're trying to work with an odorless or a slow setting monomer, I wouldn't even want to think about how long you'd have to let it rest, because it may take a really long time, and it may never hit that sweet spot where it will sculpt without cracking and just stay where you put it. So that's really what you're waiting for when you're allowing it to rest, is you're just waiting for it to become the right texture that you can sculpt details into it and it won't lose them. But it also will allow you to sculpt those details into it. And what I like to look for when I'm sculpting with stuff, and we'll see this later on, is there's a certain sheen. It's not super wet and shiny looking. It's just a little softer looking, a little more velvety looking. And that's what I always look for before I start sculpting and adding in all those little details. And it kind of becomes second nature, where you, as you know, the more you sculpt with something and the more you sculpt with a particular product line, the more you learn its intricacies and you really understand when to do what with it. And the last one is take your time, which is a cliche, and I just had to put that in there because it's true. You know, the more you're trying to rush something, the more it's not going to work. And if you just allow yourself some time to wait for the correct sheen on your acrylic, and the more you allow yourself time to just look at your photo to decide what the next step is, if you are recreating something like a character and you do want to try to break it down a little bit, give yourself those moments to look at it and understand and get your bearings before you proceed, and it'll work out so much better, and it'll save you time in the long run because you won't go back and have to fix things as much. Not that there's anything wrong with going back to fix things whatsoever. Now the next is little tips on painting your 3D work. So the big thing with painting acrylic, especially if you're using acrylic and not even 4D gel, has the same kind of slight rough porous texture. Gel products will pull and grab, and if you want to know more about my whole gel versus acrylic paint and when to use each one, I do have a specific gel versus acrylic paint live class. Again, links in the description box below. But for this purpose, just know that acrylic paint is going to give you smoother, better results on 3D art. So I'm using all acrylic paints. Most of them are Americana brand. I am using one Ceramcoat. But just use some acrylic paints. Craft paints are what you want for this. You don't want like a heavy body artist acrylic because it's going to be too thick and it's not going to give you those smooth lines either. You want a very thin viscosity acrylic paint. And just your regular cheap $1 a bottle acrylic paint is what you want for that. You want to find a tiny brush. Nail art brushes are fantastic for this. Make sure that your acrylic painting brushes and your gel painting brushes are not the same brush. You don't want to mix between them because the gel you don't fully wash out of your brush and it won't mix with your acrylic well and it'll make a big mess. So just have a acrylic paint specific brush, and then as long as it's a nice tiny one you like to work with, it's golden. And then when you're holding your brush to your 3D art, you hold it perpendicular. You hold it at a 90-degree angle so that if your art's here, you hold it this way. Normally when I paint, I hold it fairly flat to the surface. But with this, you don't want to. You want to hold it up above so that you're going in and around the 3D art and you're not going to hit details that you're trying to paint around. Dilute your paint slightly with water. My black paint, I permanently diluted. I just poured probably half a teaspoon or so of water into my bottle and shook it up. So it's fairly well diluted always, and I don't have to worry about diluting it, continuously kind of as I go. I do sometimes still do it if it needs to, but for the most part, my black paint is diluted to the consistency I like. And depending on your other colors, you may or may not want to, but black specifically, I would dilute. And then last but not least, top coat. You don't want to top coat with gel top coat your 3D art. You want to top coat with regular old lacquer. So the one I'm using for matte is the Morgan Taylor Matte Wrap. It's got a really nice big flat brush and it doesn't dry down into a foggy, filmy look. It dries completely clear, which is what you want because you don't want all of those things late. Hello everybody that's saying hi in the comments. I'm so happy that everybody's here and I just love all this participation. But then otherwise the other gel top, or not gel top coat, the other top coat I use for my 3D art is the Koopa 3D Glaze. And this is because it came with my NTNA stuff and I've been using it and I like it okay, so it works out. But otherwise, any basic top coat that you can get at Walmart or wherever you go, that is just regular top coat that's not something fancy. I know some brands, Sally Hansen has a bunch of different top coats that claim to do one thing or another. Don't get any of those, just the really basic thing is all you need, which is essentially what this is. And it's actually pretty cheap. If you do buy stuff from Koopa, it's not a bad idea to add that in. So that's it. And now I'm pretty sure if you guys are ready, we can get started on sculpting our Mickey Mouse. So I'm going to grab my beautiful pink gloves and I'm going to slip these on. And then here is the nail that I'm using. I have it painted with 2 coats of gel polish and then my gel top coat. And if you guys want to know the color of it, the gel polish is Madame Glam in the color Energize Your Day, which is one of their new colors. And it is a gorgeous red that just seems perfect for Mickey Mouse. So we have that, and then the acrylic colors I'm going to be using are Double Dips Black Like My Heart and their Toffee Pecan. These are 2 colors I use constantly and am a big fan of. And then of course the brush I showed you, my Koopa 3D sculpting brush and my Koopa monomer that's in an old recycled, reused jelly jar. All right, I'm gonna get my reference photo up. And then as I'm sculpting this, I won't keep my eye on the comment section quite as closely as I was before, but I will check back and answer questions as they come up. So if you have a question still, definitely ask me. I will make sure they're all attended to, but it may just take me a second to answer them. All right, we're gonna zoom that in. That's nice and blurry. There we go. All right. So I should probably open up these 2. When you're sculpting a character, we're gonna look at our Mickey Mouse picture for just a second. And if you guys hopefully all have this photo if you're sculpting along with me. So we have our Mickey Mouse photo here. Now if you guys were with me for my character breakdown class, I drew a circle for his head first, and then I added things like, his eye area and his mouth and his smile and all that stuff. And then, add his ears, do the big stuff, and then work your way down smaller. We're going to essentially do the same thing. And hopefully you guys can see the similarities between the concept and ideas from that class to this one. And it's just kind of nice to have that sketching if you like to sketch down first before you try to sculpt a new character, especially if you haven't done it very often. It just kind of gives you some nice background knowledge. So there's our Mickey photo. And we're going to start with the black for his head. And we're going to sculpt a circle, just like how we sketched a circle. This would be the same thing for painting. Sometimes I paint things not in the same fashion that I sketch them, because I just sort of go in with it and I add things where my brain decides to, and it's not as orderly, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be. It just means I'm kind of a crazy person at times. So I'm going to set my acrylic down. I'm going to gently pat it. As you can see, it went from being kind of crystally looking to it smoothing out very well now. This is something that especially happens with black acrylic, because there has to be so much pigment in it to get it to be that deep of a color that it sometimes tends to just look a little granular for a second. And then I'm just going to keep patting it out. I re-wet my brush. Like I said, this is a fast setting monomer, and that's going to give me a little bit more working time so that I'm not as rushed. And I'm just going to bring this down. Now the bottom of his mouth gets pulled out a little bit, so I'm going to try to keep that flatter than at the top of his head. And then afterwards, I'm just going to kind of clean up some of these lines a little bit with the belly of my brush. Now, because I have some gel top coat on the background of my nail, any little sludginess that there gets to be, which there is, I can just wipe away and then it's gone. Especially when you're working with black acrylic, that's inevitable. So if you're sculpting something like this and this was a red sculpted nail instead of a red painted nail with the acrylic or with gel polish, you may want to stick a layer of gel top coat on there anyways, just to kind of accommodate for cleaning up easily. I'm going to add a little bit more acrylic to this. I want to thicken it up at the back or at the top of his head just a little bit more. Just kind of pat this around, bring it down. Working nice and slowly. Again, like I said, don't feel rushed. I'm going to brush my brush across it like that. That gives it a really nice smooth look very quickly. Kind of clean up that line at the top. And so far we're looking pretty good. So I'm going to kind of say that part of this is complete, and then I'm going to be sculpting his ears. Get rid of a little bit more of that staining that happens. All right, so I'm going to grab another smaller bead of acrylic, and I'm going to set that down in the placement for one ear, and then pat it out into the shape that we're sculpting. So like I said, during our 3D or during our character breakdown class, look at shapes of everything, look at size comparisons. All of that stuff is still, going through my head the whole time I'm sculpting this. It's the same kind of a mental pattern that I do. No matter what I'm doing art-wise, I'm continually comparing sizes of different things, shapes, thinking, is this a perfect circle? Is it a slightly flattened circle? What angle does it tip? All of that stuff is racing through my head the whole time. So we got that ear patted out, and now we can go ahead and do the other one. I'm going to adjust my focus just a little bit. That looks better. Grab the same or close to the same amount of acrylic for the other ear. Set it down. Same thing, kind of let it get so it's not so granular looking, and then pat it out. Look from ear to ear. This ear is bigger than this one, so I'm going to pat this one out slightly more. Now look at them. Now this one's a little bit bigger, so I'm going to push it in a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to say that they look pretty good. I'm happy with that. Clean up these edges a little bit. And so that's your first step. And now if you were sculpting a Mickey Mouse that was like your basic Mickey Mouse, not facial features or anything, but just, this is instantly iconic and recognizable where nobody would question what it is. And you could be done. And you could be like, you know what, I just sculpted myself a 3D Mickey Mouse and move on with your day. And that would be fine. But we're going to take it a little bit further, and we are going to give him some facial features. So I'm going to take my monomer and my brush, and I'm not going to like swirl it around on the bottom because you don't want the bristles of your brush to be abused that way. But we're just going to kind of just tap it on the side like this, and then we're going to wipe it off on the towel just to make sure that any of that pesky black pigment is gone. And it may take a few times of just, getting your brush wet and wiping it out to get it all out before you continue, because the next color is so much lighter that if there's any black pigment left in there, it'll end up looking kind of gray and streaky, and we don't want that. All right, so the next color I'm using is that Toffee Pecan from Double Dip, which if you watch my videos and you look at what colors I use, you see it. I use it all the time. I'm going to be grabbing small beads of this, and I'm going to be working progressively. I'm not going to try to sculpt all of his tan area of his face in one go around. I'm going to do it in little bits at a time. So I'm going to grab the first bead, and I'm going to set it down right about where, like right below where his ear touches his face. So like look at that corner, set it down right below that. And then push it up, almost like you were attaching or working on cuticle work if you were sculpting on a person. Like you're just gently pushing it up towards their cuticle, and then you're bringing it down. It's very similar to that. So there's the first kind of side of his face. And just bring it down like that. Now you've got one side done. We're going to go ahead and do the other side. Grab a little bead, same size, try to get as close to the same. Set it down. Let it polymerize, which is where it gets rid of that kind of grainy look. Press that up, and then bring it down on the side. Anytime you need to clean up a line, the belly of your brush is there for you. Okay, so now that we have both of those like top areas of his face done, and they look pretty symmetrical, everything's looking pretty good, and we can move on, and I'm going to do his cheeks. And so for his cheeks, we're going to fill in, and we're going to make this shape. We're going to bring it out on the outside of that black line of the circle a little bit on both sides, and then fill in the bottom of the circle. So I'm going to grab a slightly bigger bead this time, and I'm going to set it down, pull the cat hair out of there, nobody needs that, and then pull the one side out, like so, and then stretch it across. See if it's big enough to go all the way to the other side. It is, just barely. And then kind of bring it down there. Clean up the bottom of it. All right, so now we have all of that sort of, preliminary tan work done. We got to make it smooth because it's not smooth, it's not pretty right now, but we have all that base work done that filling it in and making it look smooth and pretty is considerably easier than if we were to try to do it from the beginning. Since, we've got our little base outlines done, it's not that big a deal to just go through and fill this in so that it's not as lumpy and bumpy and crazy. And we're not done yet, so don't worry either if there are some marks that show or anything of that nature. Just going to try to smooth it out. Okay, so now that we have that, we need to add a couple things with this tan color yet. We need to add his mouth that comes down because he's got in the reference photo that I sent out, his mouth is open, so we're going to sculpt it that way. And then we're going to add a little bit more height to his snout area, and then we also need to sculpt his nose. So we're going to begin with the thing that is furthest back. So when you look at your reference photo, imagine that it's in front of you and it's three-dimensional. And when you're looking at somebody's face, the furthest thing out on anybody is going to be their nose, and then it progressively goes back. So we've done his hair and his ears, if you're imagining this as a human, and then the base of his face. Then it would be his, we're going to do his mouth, and then kind of build our way up. So I'm going to grab another bead of this same color, this Toffee Pecan, set it down right about the bottom of our circle, and this time we're going to let that sit there. As you can see, still very shiny. This was a wet bead. And then once it starts to just very slightly look matte, we're going to start manipulating it and giving it so that he will have his open mouth. And kind of pull it off to the sides a little bit. I'm going to diffuse that corner so it wasn't quite so intense there. There. So now we've got his open mouth. And once that's done, then we can go through and add his snout. I'm going to grab another bead about the same size, maybe a little bigger than that previous one. And we're going to set that down and then pat it out. So the biggest thing for his snout is that we want a little line above his eyes. So then after we have that done, I don't want a sharp, distinct line anywhere else necessarily. So I'm going to sort of smooth it out underneath and on the sides. You just want that nice crisp line at the top there. And if there's any places where the lines did not smooth out perfectly, like on this one side, it's not quite as smooth right in here as I would want it, I'm going to take just the slightest amount more, and I'm going to apply it right to that spot and then just blend it out. All right, so there is our Mickey Mouse. Again, at this stage, we've got all of our different layers happening. I'm going to show it to you from the side view. You can see it's really not that dimensional. The more layers you add and the more you want the dimension, you can certainly sculpt it in. This is what I would consider to be very wearable 3D art because it isn't fragile. It's super durable. It won't break off a client. It won't catch on your hair. The only place it may possibly catch on your hair is going to be his little black nose, which we'll add in a second. But otherwise, it's just super reliable. It's not going anywhere. So now that we have it so far, I'm going to grab another very small bead of my black acrylic. And I'm going to place down right in the middle of his snout. and this will be for his nose. I'm gonna let that polymerize just enough that I can move it around and then gently pat it out into the shape of his nose. If I need to, just like with everything else, you can always clean up your lines. So now at this point, it'd be up to you. If you wanted to, you could sculpt his body and his arms, and you could just keep adding things. I kind of like the look of just a floating Mickey head, so we're going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to put away my monomer and my powders, and we're just going to let that all cure fully before we move on to painting. And I am a huge advocate for immediately closing jars as soon as you're done with them, because I've spilled so many and wasted so much product and had so many messes that, I don't take any chances anymore, usually at least. In fact, I just spilled my nail dehydrator tonight while I was working on my sister's nails. I made a huge mess. So, that's kind of how that goes. And I was actually trying to pick it up to close it when it happened, so fitting. So I'm going to move all of this off to the side, and I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to bring over my water cup and my other towel. This is a clean paper towel that I will use for cleaning my brush from my acrylic paint, my acrylic painting brush, and then my 4 colors of paint. So if we want to look at what colors they are exactly while that nail is just fully curing to make sure we don't have any issues, I'm using the Deco Art Americana in the color Lamp Black, which is ebony. I'm using the same brand in Snow White, which is titanium white, just your classic black and white. And then I'm using baby pink. And this bottle is super old, so it may not be an existing product anymore, but this is the Ceramcoat by Delta in the color Barn Red. But yeah, like I said, this one may not be made anymore because it's possibly 20 years old. I don't know for sure. It's not new. It's definitely not new. So I'm going to give all of these a quick shake. I always do that right before I open them, make sure I shake them, and even periodically while I'm working, if I'm doing something for a while, I'll close up my bottles and I will reshake them. And I don't ever put paint on a palette. I just open them like this, and I use my cap as little paint cups, and that works out fine. So I'm going to get all of these bottles opened up so that they're all ready for me. Get them lined up. And thank you so much, Gemini, saving this video, and just, anybody that supports my channel is so valued to me. I know so many of you by name. I see your guys' name all the time, and it's like I feel like we're a great, we got a little nail club going on here, and it's so much fun. I love doing these, and I love seeing all your names, so thank you. So here's our Mickey Mouse again. Now fully, I can touch it, no problems whatsoever. If that's one thing with using a fast setting monomer, if you are working and you're trying to get something done, you don't really have much wait time. In fact, I could have pretty much immediately started painting this if I wasn't worried about picking everything up. So now we're going to go back and we're going to look at our Mickey Mouse picture. We're going to decide how we want to outline him. Because he's got black all the way around the perimeter with his ears and the top of his head and everything, we don't have to outline that, which is, a step in the right direction. And then his mouth and all of this is actually outlined, now that I'm looking at it, it's outlined in brown. So I'm going to open up my brown paint too, because I actually really like outlining in brown. So we're going to grab that as well, and I'll show you that one. But we're going to add his eyes, we're going to add a couple little outlines here, but he's pretty basic. Luckily with Mickey Mouse, there's not too much to him. He's iconic, everybody knows him. And for learning to sculpt something like this, he's a really great choice because he's relatively easy. So I need to grab brown paint. The one I'm going to use is also Deco Art Americana, and this one is Milk Chocolate. I'm going to give that a shake quick, and then open it up. So I've got all of these out. I like to have all of my paints open so that I don't have to stop and put everything down and pick them up. All right, so let's begin. I'm going to start with my brown outlines. Now that I know that I'm planning on doing brown outlines. That's about how it goes too. I'm always grabbing different stuff when I'm working because I forget about something and then I gotta go back and get it. Okay, so we're gonna dip our brush. Just the very tips of the bristles are dipped. And it's usually as soon as I dip it, I wipe it off so that there's not too much paint and I don't get a big glob of paint. I want just a little tiny bit. And we're gonna start with his mouth. So I'm gonna give him his little smile lines. There's the first one. And there's the second one. And this is so silly. I never paint with gloves on. It's just not my normal thing. And my brush was slipping. So off with the gloves. Oh yeah, that feels better. All right, redip the brush. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to just connect smile line 1 with smile line 2 using the shapes we sculpted in for his snout area to help us and guide us to the right spots. Just connect those right across like so. And then after that's done, we're going to add the line of his open mouth. Don't do it right along this edge because he has lips. So we're going to do it right inside. And then on the other side, grab it. Now, especially in his mouth, these lines don't need to be perfect. They can be thicker than you want, and it's not an issue whatsoever because we're going to fill in his mouth anyways. So then once you have that done and those little lines there sculpted, we're going to be doing the lines of his eye area. And the first one that kind of sets his eyes off and does the base of his eyes is the one that's right above his nose. He's got a little wrinkle line right above his nose. We're going to do that one first and get that in place because that is the first step. And then this is something that is, sometimes beneficial to do is to give yourself a guide dot about the height of the top of his eyes. So I'm going to put a little dot at the top of each eye. And then I'm going to connect the first one down. So I don't know if you guys can tell how straight up and down my paintbrush is when I'm doing this. It's really pretty. I mean, it's maybe not perfectly perpendicular, but it is very close. Because if you, here, I'm going to wash the paint on my brush. If you're trying to paint here and your brush is flatter, like it's more comfortable to paint, I'm touching his nose. If you're trying to paint, you're touching his nose, and you're going to get paint on his nose. And if you're trying to paint his eyes, you don't want to get paint on his nose. That's why you have to paint this way. And then if you're trying to paint like his mouth and your brush is at a really flat angle, you're going to be getting paint where it doesn't belong on his lip. So to get thin, fine lines where you're putting them exactly where you want them, you want your brush to be going at wherever you're painting at about a 90-degree angle. So because this part of his lip is angled, you have to readjust and re-angle it so that it still gives you where you're just not going to touch anything else where it doesn't need to be touched. Okay, so now that we kind of got to see that, we're going to go back and do the rest of Mickey's eyes, bringing them down and connecting up and around. Do the other side. Another great thing with doing your outlines first in brown paint, which you see I do in a lot of my videos, even if they aren't brown in the final product, is that it makes it so that if there's a little mishap, it doesn't show very much, and a lot of times you can just ignore it and it's just fine because it's not as dramatic looking as if it was a black line. And so it gives you a little bit more of a insurance policy. Okay, so now we got his eyes done, and he's actually, the hard part is over for the painting because you got your lines down. Now it's just filling in the lines. And so as long as you can get to this stage comfortably, it's almost like you're doing a coloring book and you just have to color in the blanks. So I'm going to start with his mouth, and I'm going to be filling that in first with my burgundy color, that barn red. Carrying that up, bringing it down and around. He does have a tongue, which we will add with the pink, but I'm going to start with this. So we filled in his mouth with that red, and then we're going to let it dry. Acrylic paint dries really quickly, so it doesn't take too much time, and by the time I'm done filling in his eyes, it should be good. And so now I'm going to start his eyes, and I'm going to just do really slow filling them in. I'm not going to rush it. My videos are typically sped up to 4 times the speed because I'm a pretty slow and meticulous person, and it would take forever otherwise. Normally for my videos, some of them would be well over an hour long. And so when you're doing this, and you're used to watching me or anyone else that speeds up their videos, it might give you a false sense of how fast you should be moving, and you really don't have to rush this. So we're gonna do the same thing, slow and steady, filling in his eyes. Go at it from both angles. You don't have to just do it from the one thing. You can move your hand around and plant your pinky. Here, I'm gonna wash my brush again. This is something I really intended to touch on in some of my past classes, is to plant your pinky. So when you're painting, you don't need to use your pinky to hold on to your brush. So what you do with your pinky is you place it down. And for me, that's usually on my other hand. That's where it's comfortable for me. If I'm working on a client, sometimes I plant my pinky on their hand. If I'm painting on a canvas, it's on the canvas, but somewhere, somehow, my pinky is used as a support for my hand so that it really takes down shakiness. And if you're somebody that has a tendency to shake, I know for me, there are days where I shake, and it's never too bad, but it happens. Everybody gets shaky from time to time, I think at least, and that really eliminates 90% of it. And the other thing is, if you're not working on a client, you can twist this all around. You don't have to work on it right side up. If it's more comfortable for you to do it upside down, go for it. So we're just going to take this, continue on with our lines, making sure our pinky is down. And then my eyes aren't exactly the same height, so I'm going to fix that. All right, so now after that's done, then our burgundy paint in his mouth is dry, so we can add his little pink tongue. In there, just like so. And now that everything, all your bases are, have color in them, basically what's left is to fix any outlines and add the black. So I'm going to fix a few outlines, mainly on this eye, where they kind of got painted over a little bit and they could just look a little cleaner. Fix this one underneath his 2 eyes. There, that looks 100 times better after just that one little mark. Isn't that funny how just one little thing can really change things? So now we are going to grab our black paint, and what's left here is to do a little bit of black outlining. I'm going to add the line to separate his tongue too. There, that looks nice. We're going to do a little bit of black outlining, and then black in his pupils, no black outlines. Black in his pupils, and then we're going to take and do a few highlights. And if you want, one thing I think I will do is I'm going to mix a darker brown from my brown and my black paint to make this top line of his smile just a little bit more intense. But first we're going to add these pupils. Tiny amount of paint on my brush, almost imperceptible in the amount of paint that's on there. There's the first pupil. Here's the second one. Okay, so now that those are in there, what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm just going to take some brown paint and some black paint. And I said those backwards. I don't know if anybody caught that. I grabbed black and said brown and grabbed brown and said black. Anyways, we're going to mix those into a very dark brown. And I am using my thumb to mix. Acrylic paint is non-toxic. And if you use your thumb to mix or any skin, it's fine. It just washes off and it doesn't cause any sort of a chemical reaction, at least that I've ever heard of, like gel products potentially can. And then we're going to just smooth out this line and add a little bit more definition right there and under here. And then if you want to, and you want to take this color, I'm gonna, now that I have it and I really like how it looks, this is usually how it goes too, I just can't stop myself. I'm going to grab that same color, and I did just add water to it. I don't know if anybody caught that. I just took a wet brush and I diluted that paint. I dilute paint so frequently, I sometimes don't even realize I do it because it's second nature. But I'm gonna go through and fix up the outlines around his eyes. If you dilute it too much, it'll run. So when you are diluting paint, you have to kind of be careful with it so that it doesn't dilute it too much. And you get just the right consistency where you still have enough pigment, but it just makes it spread a little easier. All right, so now that that is done, all that is left to do on him is some highlights. We're going to put the tiniest of white polka dots on each of his pupils, and then across his nose. And there we go. We have our 3D sculpted Mickey Mouse. And you are very welcome, Maxine. I love, like I said, I love doing these. And yeah, and if anybody has any recommendations for future classes, comment with them down below. I'm always looking for ideas, and if I know what people are interested in, that certainly, would help me make a decision if I'm going back and forth between a couple things. Also, if you want to have kind of an advanced idea of what the classes are going to be about, and you want to have some say in it, I have been posting a poll on my channel in the community section on what the next class is going to be. And so I give 3 choices, and then the past 3 months, I think it is, I've been going on whatever the popular vote is. And so if you want to kind of have a little bit of a say and participate in that poll, definitely check for that. So it'll probably be sometime either Thursday through next weekend. So like in a week or so, I'll try to nail down what August's class is going to be about. And so if you have any, like I said, any ideas for classes you'd be interested in, or you want to do that poll, check for that. And we're just letting our Mickey Mouse's paint dry, and then we can top coat. And so I think it's probably good. We can look at this now. So like I said, don't use gel to top coat. The reason for that is that it has a floating texture to it, and it will fill in texture. It'll float in and fill in all of this 3D that we sculpted, and it'll kind of get rid of it. And we don't want to get rid of our 3D texture. We work so hard to put it in, so why would we, mask it? So we're going to use matte top coat that is just regular lacquer. And I'm just using this one because it's super accessible to me. Any matte top coat is probably fine. I do think that this one dries with more clarity than some. So if you want to get this particular one, it's, not a terrible idea. But I have used others in the past that were okay. So I'm going to get just a little bit of the matte top coat on my brush. And we really only have to top coat what we painted with the acrylic paint. The ears and everything else doesn't need it. So just cover what has acrylic paint on it. And then once this dries, it will shrink down. And you can even see now, it isn't covering up too much of that 3D texture. And when it dries down, it'll be completely flat and it won't affect that whatsoever. So yeah, I would use one of those. I have seen people that top coat their 3D art with gel, and it just seems like it gets rid of it. And I hate to see such a waste, especially when people work so hard to sculpt these teeny tiny little things with acrylic and then they're just gone. And all of these tips for sculpting with acrylic, like I said, some of the basics, how to find shapes, how to paint it, all that stuff is easily transferable conceptually to gel. So if you are a 4D gel person, which actually sculpting 3D stuff is really easy and super fun to do with 4D gel. It's like working with Play-Doh. And so if you've never tried that before, I would give it a go just because it is kind of fun to play around with. And Otherwise, I hope this class was super helpful to you. If you want to be added on to my email list, send me an email to hotpinkzebrapolish@hotmail.com, and that email address is listed in the description box below. So if you want to just double check your spelling or anything like that, it is there, and you can get added on to my email list so we can get just a little bit of information ahead of time, and you can be prepared for the classes so that you have all your products ready and you can follow along with me. And I would recommend, if you are somebody that wants to do these things, that you do follow along with me. The reason is you may come up with questions that you didn't know you had if you aren't doing it, because I know sometimes you don't think of them until you're trying to do it yourself. And so if you want to be able to participate a little bit more, definitely follow along with me. Let's have a little art night. And otherwise, thank you guys so much this evening. I had so much fun once again. I can't wait for next month's class where I get to see you guys all again. I will see you all later. Bye.